is going to last as a museum piece as long as the as the Egyptian pieces. They're going to be around for a long time, but they will be a great reminder of a certain moment in time, I suppose, of humankind. And for me, interestingly, if you look at the plastic bag, after the ban in New Zealand, the change in behaviour that we adopted was phenomenal. It was such a quick...
Was it?
It was a quick turnaround. 2-3 years ago, you saw people bring their own bags to the shopping centre and you're in the queue and you go, oh yeah, that's a green hippie sort of person. Yep, okay. But now you see anybody who doesn't bring their own bags to the shopping centre and you're scoffing and going, what? That's just not normal. So I think the turnaround has been fantastic, and actually celebrating, this moment in time is good, and making sure that they never appear in the, that they are a collector's item and they don't go into landfill is another good reason for a small museum like that to get off.
Someone asked, do you think that she would be interested in a Warnock's plastic bag? Can you recall Warnock's, Mauricio?
I can remember the name.
I got my school shoes from Warnock's.
Shoes, that's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
The Warnock's bag.
Yeah.
Send it to us. No, actually, don't send it to us. What would I do with the Warnock's bag? But in terms of that social history, Mauricio, isn't it interesting what once we thought was just useless trash can actually be collected, and it does provide an insight into, a society gone by. I mean, a year on, do you ever miss plastic bags?
Well, let's be honest, there's a lot of plastic bags still out there. I mean, we're all fooling ourselves if people aren't using plastic bags. There's all sorts of shops using them still, but I wouldn't be surprised if this woman in 20 years' time has a huge collection, and it's probably worth something in 20 years. Who knows?
Yep.
I gave my daughter-in-law some things to take home in a plastic supermarket bag I had found at the back of the wardrobe yesterday. She was excited to see it and said it was a museum piece. Thank you very much. I just want to bring up this because I thought some people might be interested, and we might return to this earlier next week. Wallace, says Alice, SeniorNet is a national computer club that started almost 30 years ago in New Zealand. People aged 55 plus can join for an annual fee of $30. It runs inexpensive courses on any tech topic, and it runs internet banking courses. So we might get in touch and we might have the Senior Computing Club on the program next week. But on a final note, I thought this was quite interesting. A move by the Christchurch City Council to use LEDs in their streetlights has prompted many complaints. One resident says his home lit up like a stadium at night. And I thought I'd go around the panel. Olivia Esterhazy, what do you think about this? Because LEDs, they're more efficient, aren't they?
They are hugely more efficient. And I think the fact that, Christchurch Council has gone down this path is a really promising one. The issue obviously being is they now need to dim them and make sure that they are balancing that whole safety in the streets versus lighting up the house like a Christmas tree.
What do you reckon, Mauricio?
Curtains. Good solution, I'd say there.
Really? But you have to have blackout curtains. And do you know how much blackout curtains cost?
No, I don't own a house, so I would have a clue.
But what do you think, Olivia? Because you've got to balance people's right to a dark home at night, and LEDs are very, very, very bright.
They are, but you can dim them, and you can get some that are clouded as well, that are not just white.
Ooh.
So there's a lot of choices there, and I'm sure the council will figure that one out.
I did not know. Olivia Esterhazy and Mauricio Almeida Perez, thank you very much both for being on Friday's panel. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you Monday, 3:45. Till then, have a great weekend. Checkpoint next.
Kei te whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko Nita Blake Person tēnei. E hariaki nei, it's game on for international sport in New Zealand. Netball and cricket get the green light to host tests and tours, with the Wallabies touching down tonight. Sports Minister Grant Robertson joins us. National and Labour woo the West Coast on the campaign trail, while New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says a dangerous settlement at Ihumātao is just around the corner. Today marks 6 months since we went into level 4 lockdown. It comes as officials identify 35 close contacts of the 3 community cases reported on Wednesday. The cricketing world pays tribute to former Australian batsman Dean Jones, and we check in on Ken the Cheeky Kia.
RNZ News at 5, kia ora ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. A taupo spa business is asking people not to place blame, but to follow health rules after a family who have tested positive for COVID-19 visited them last week. The family travelled to the town between September the 18th and 20th, and health authorities have now identified 15 locations visited by the family while they may have been infectious. Operations manager at the Taupo de Bret's Spa Resort, Mirera Petra, says they've received abusive messages from some customers since the news broke yesterday. She says no one's to blame.
It's not our fault. It's not this family's fault. Nobody to know, and we just have to prepare and to follow the plan and to follow the public health instructions.
Mirella Petra says the resort has opened for business after a deep clean. Meanwhile, health officials today announced 2 new COVID-19 cases. One of those is in the community and linked to last month's Auckland cluster. An independent review into allegations of racism at Waikato University has concluded the claims are incorrect and inaccurate. But the review found universities could have problems of structural racism and casual discrimination. Philippa Tolley reports.
6 senior Māori academics made the allegations of racism earlier this month. They said Māori expertise was being ignored and undervalued, and Māori staff were paid less. Harawira Gardner and Hekia Parata, who led the inquiry, found the specific claims were inaccurate. But the writers said universities adhere to Western university traditions and cultures, making a case for structural, systemic and casual discrimination. The review recommends the university engage in future-focused process to determine how to apply the Treaty of Waitangi and to refresh its relationships with iwi. This is Philippa Tolley.
A leader of the Ihu Mātau occupation has called the speech by Winston Peters today disgusting and filled with lies. The New Zealand First Leader has hit out at the protest leaders, saying they sought to overturn a legitimate sale and that they have no standing with respect to the land. Kiani Matatazipu, who helped lead the land occupation, says iwi never sold their land because it was stolen, and it is an insult to suggest protesters do not have mana whenua over the land.
I'm hugely not surprised, but disgusted at the fact that he has gone out today and just blatantly lied to scaremonger to win votes.
Ihu Mātau protest leader Kiani Matatazipu. The Labour leader says National's plan to change targets for child poverty is misguided. In its policy on families and children released today, National says it will drive a reduction in child poverty by targeting children suffering material hardship. Current targets for achieving a reduction in child poverty assess several factors, including median incomes. Jacinda Ardern says Labour's broader approach is better.
Material hardship, that's a measure of children's access, for instance, to things like healthy meals. We have a food and schools program that I've heard no support from National over, and yet that's one of the practical things we can do to improve the well-being of kids.
Jacinda Ardern. National says if elected it will restructure the school lunch program to make sure it focuses on children who need it. Auckland's rush hour traffic is expected to be more congested than usual as holidaymakers head north, putting extra pressure on the damaged Harbour Bridge. The Transport Agency is advising motorists to consider using alternative routes or delay travelling until tomorrow. Amy Williams reports.
It's taking double the time to get from A to B on the motorway leading to the Harbour Bridge. Gridlock traffic isn't the only battering the bridge can expect this weekend. The bridge operations team is preparing for heavy rain and strong winds forecast for Sunday. Waka Kotahi says if needed for safety, it'll reduce speeds, close lanes or even shut the entire bridge. To reduce loads, truck drivers have been asked not to cross the Harbour Bridge until there's a permanent repair, likely weeks away. Ko Amy Williams, aho.
Meanwhile, emergency services have cleared a crash which was blocking the northbound lanes of Auckland's Waterview Tunnel that caused a traffic backlog to Hillsborough. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. The Silver Ferns and the Black Caps will host international sides over the next couple of months following government approval to allow teams in. Netball New Zealand has confirmed the Silver Ferns will host England in a 3-test series in Hamilton next month, while the West Indies and Pakistan will play series against the Black Caps perhaps from November to January. All international sides will quarantine for 14 days, with players able to train as a squad 4 days after arriving in the country, dependent on returning a negative COVID-19 test on day 3. Netball New Zealand Chief Executive Jenny Wiley says the series against England is a significant milestone.
What's really important for the netball landscape is the last time any test match netball was played was January. England has not had a domestic series this year, so they really wanted to be able to get those athletes out there. And, you know, the Kiwis are coming off the back of a World Cup in 2019, so it's important to keep that momentum.
Jenny Wiley. The Australia coach Justin Langer has led a chorus of tributes for Australian cricket great Dean Jones, who has died aged 59. Jones suffered a heart attack in his Mumbai hotel a day after commentating on the Indian Premier League. The Los Angeles Lakers are just one win away from the NBA basketball finals after 114-108 win over the Denver Nuggets in Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals. They're now 3-1 up in the best of 7 series. That's the news.
Kia ora, Julian Wilcox here in for Kim Hill on Saturday morning. This week, the giant sporting experiment going on at Disney World in Florida at the moment. Ben Golliver on life inside the NBA bubble. With bushfire season around the corner in Australia, I speak to Indigenous fire practitioner Victor Stevenson about his book, Fire Country. And Rachel Taulale joins me. She's the head of the family-owned Māori food and beverage producer, Kono. Coming up on Saturday morning, tomorrow from 8 a.m. to midday, here on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Partly cloudy, isolated showers in the west. Scattered rain spreading south tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Waikato through to Wellington, including central high country. Fine spells, scattered showers tonight, some heavy. Light rain developing late tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine weather apart from a few showers in Wairarapa. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago mainly fine. Isolated showers for Canterbury and North Otago, possibly heavy with hail. Norwesterlies rising to severe gale in Canterbury high country tomorrow night. For central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, fine spells and isolated showers, rain about the Otago headwaters tomorrow night. Northerlies rising to severe gale in exposed places tomorrow night also. Bulla to Fiordland, scattered showers turning to rain in Fiordland tomorrow afternoon, then spreading north and becoming heavy with possible thunderstorms. Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Kia ora koutou and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Nita Blake-Person, filling in for Lisa Owen. The West Coast was a campaign battleground today, with both the National and Labour leader there trying to woo voters. Judith Collins had a packed schedule visiting local businesses and mingling with the public, while Jacinda Ardern's visit was more low-key, focused on health facilities rather than public events. Political reporter Yvette McCullough was following the leaders and filed this report.
Great. Look at this. Yeah, it is. I think so.
Judith Collins enjoying the local delicacy.
We have to have a bit of
Absolutely, got to have a big slab of bread.
Yeah, that's the one.
She was vying hard to win over the West Coast today, visiting local businesses.
I do apologise for wearing red today.
That's right. Sometimes I like to step on the old red.
And speaking to national supporters in Putukaiki.
I actually think we need fewer decisions made out of Wellington and more decisions made on the coast.
Yes. By her side was Nationals candidate Maureen Pugh. The MP, former leader Simon Bridges, was outed as having described as effing useless. But Ms Collins is confident she can win.
People here feel very much as though they've been let down by Damien O'Connor, and actually, you know what they like about Maureen? She's absolutely loyal to the coast, and they love that.
Jacinda Ardern was trying to drum up support on the West Coast too. So what would have happened if they crossed paths?
Well, I would have said, hello, how are you? Hope you're having a nice day. And then I would have gone on to talking to the coasters, because I'm not going to learn anything from Jacinda Ardern. She's got nothing to teach me.
Nothing will happen if we do have contact with each other. Our force fields will not create any kind of explosion, so no one needs to worry.
Incumbent Damien O'Connor says he's not scared of his national opponent.
No.
I think that Damien's scared of anyone from what I've experienced in my time.
No, why?
And he wouldn't be drawn on how useful he thinks Ms Pugh is.
They're not words that I would use. Those are the words of her colleagues. I'm not going to get into that.
National says Labour is out of touch and its stance on mining is ruining the West Coast economy.
The assumption that the coast exists solely around mining is wrong. And I would go to the people for their view on the role we've played in government to support the coast before I would go to Judith Collins.
How many coasters has she talked to reach that view?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, mining is important on the West Coast. I understand that she doesn't care about where the minerals and metals that go into her iPhone come from, but some of us do.
Ms Ardern's West Coast schedule didn't allow for any real FaceTime with the public, but she still felt the love from passers-by.
You're beautiful. Thank you so much for all you've done. And I hope you guys get back in, please.
Her focus today was on trying to highlight the government's track record on health investment. She turned the sod at the Bulla Health Centre and attended the official opening of Te Niko Hospital and Health Centre.
We need to make sure we have the services that our people need, and we need decent infrastructure. You have been waiting a long time for decent infrastructure.
But Ms Collins says Labour is trying to take credit for a hospital funded by National. And the event itself wasn't without a political heckle, with West Coast DHB Chair Rick Barker imploring Ms Ardern not to move away from elected boards or to amalgamate DHBs.
The words from Spock of Star Trek come to mind. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Smaller populations feel apprehensive that their concerns might be swamped by the larger numbers elsewhere.
Our view is that for a country of our size, we could afford to reduce down the number of DHBs whilst improving the access people have to care no matter where they are in the country.
Judith Collins rounded off her tiki tour of the West Coast with a public meeting in Hokitika, making the most of being back at level 1. From Hokitika for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
And we've just heard Labour leader Jacinda Ardern and National leader Judith Collins are on the same flight out of Hokitika. That should be fun. Well, further north, New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters was campaigning. He says a dangerous settlement at Ihumātao is just around the corner and only his party will stop it. During a speech at Orewa to around 100 people today, Mr Peters said any deal over the disputed land would trigger a landslide of treaty claims at enormous taxpayer expense. He then went on to deny race baiting or staging the event at Orewa, the site of one of the country's most controversial speeches. Our reporter Annika Smith filed this story.
We intend also to remove divisive, race-based features from legislation. The principles of the treaty, never clearly defined yet ever expanding, are the thin edge of a wedge leading to a racially divided state and no obligations for local governments to consult Maori in preference to other New Zealanders.
A throwback to Don Brash's Orewa speech in 2004. It was, of course, the elephant in the room as New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters took the stage at a community hall this afternoon. Mr Brash had been here 16 years ago, and it was this location that Mr Peters decided to draw Ihumātao into the election campaign.
One law for all is again under threat, and nowhere more so than at a place just across the other side of the harbour called Ihumātao. You've all heard about it. But do you know what it means for you, your future, your children's future, and dare I say it, your grandchildren's future?
New Zealand First has been a vocal opponent of the protest movement at Ihumātao, but Mr Peters went further today, calling protest leader Pania Newton by name as among a group of Māori stuck in the past. He said Ms Newton is not mana whenua and was no hero in his books for having sought to overturn a legitimate sale between Fletchers and local iwi. Mr Peters says treaty settlements, once used to right wrongs, had become a cottage industry.
There's an industry going on there, and guess who's paying for it? You got a mirror in your home? Well, tomorrow morning you have a good hard look, because that's who's going to pay for it.
Mr Peters then laid out his opposition to the coalition government's attempts to resolve the dispute at Ihumātao. He said he was never consulted over the decision to halt development because he was overseas at the time. His party also refused to invoke the agree to disagree clause of its coalition agreement with Labour.
We staved off any action before the 2020 election. But the question here in Orewa today is this. If Labour governs after the election by themselves, and heaven forbid, or with the Greens, God help us, then they will do a deal on Ihumātao.
Speaking on behalf of protest group Sol, Kiani Matata Sipu said Mr Peters' comments reek of desperation.
I think he's just scrambling for whatever he can to get his party over the line. And you find that when we get to this part of the election process, that desperation often calls for desperate measures, and that often comes with lots of scaremongering and lots of racism.
Mr Peters batted away accusations he was race baiting or using Orewa's history as a platform after his speech today.
I'm here saying how important it is for everybody in this country, including Māori, to have a unity pathway forward. We can't go ahead with this business. I've said it all my career. Don't come along and be shallow and say I'm race baiting, because it couldn't be more false.
Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says the party is committed to finding a solution and believes one can be found if Labour is re-elected. As for today, it marks another chapter in Ihumātao's colourful and controversial history. Mō te hōtaka o te ata nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
Well, Aucklanders fleeing the city for the school holidays are being urged to be patient as they hit the road out of town, with damage to the Harbour Bridge still causing some delays. 2 of the bridge's 8 lanes are out of action while repairs are done. That work's adding to the usual Friday night congestion. There have also been 2 crashes on the city's motorways over the past few hours. Well, joining me now with the latest on the traffic situation is Neil Walker from Waka Kotahi. Kia ora, Neil. Would you bring us up to date? What's happening on the bridge and the roads in general tonight?
Good evening. On the bridge, so things are flowing quite well actually on southbound. So heading from the North Shore into town, there's still some congestion on the heading north at the night, and some of that will be contributed to people leaving town, I'd imagine. So, but the bridge it's flowing okay at the moment.
That is a relief. What are some of the other areas which can be a bit troublesome on the Auckland network tonight?
Yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of traffic on State Highway 1 heading south, so out of the city. And there's also a bit on State Highway 20 at the moment around the airport area. So it looks like what we'd expect to see when people going away for a long weekend. There's also there's a few spots on the Western Ring Route too, which have got a bit of congestion on them around Te Aratu and Henderson area. So, but overall, not too bad. It's probably better than what we expected tonight.
Some
knowing
good
that we've got
news.
school holidays. Yeah.
Great. Well, looking ahead to the weekend looks a bit wild weather-wise. How do we drive in safe conditions, manage, make sure there's not another incident on the Harbour Bridge?
Yeah, right. So, and we've got some predictions around the weather for the weekend. So we're expecting Saturday night, Sunday morning there to be high winds on the bridge. Given that we've got a temporary fix on the bridge at the moment, we are going to be more conservative around when we would close the bridge. So I suppose general advice is that if you're driving a high-sided vehicle, or if you're riding a motorcycle, the best option is to take the Western Ring Route rather than going over that bridge Monday night, Sunday morning, or to keep an eye out on the weather forecast and see how it's going. But we're expecting there to be high winds. Based on the predictions that we're getting at the moment, I mean, there's a possibility that we might even close the bridge for a short period if we need to, if we think the wind gusts are getting up higher. And this is mainly related to the state of the bridge at the moment with the temporary fix on it. We don't want any other incidents on there while it's in that state.
Just confirming, Neil, when might those bridge closures have to happen?
So the predictions at the moment are Saturday night, Sunday morning. We're expecting high winds during that period. It'll quieten down a bit on Sunday, and then we're expecting them to pick up again on Monday, Tuesday.
Motorists, just keep an eye on traffic closures to keep abreast of that.
That's right, yep.
And of course, for the rest of the country, it's looking like it'll be pretty blustery, icy, wild in parts. Any other road closures you might be expecting?
Not at the moment. The focus is on Auckland, I'd have to say.
Right. How are things progressing in terms of managing the repairs, and when are we expecting those other 2 lanes to be open?
I can't give you a time for that. All I can say really is our people are working very, very hard to see if we can get it done as quickly as we possibly can. And of course, the overarching thing was we want to make sure it's that when we open it, it's been done properly, it's safe. There's a lot of peer review work that needs to be done to make sure that when they do reload the bridge with the new fix on it, that it's actually been done correctly. So we're hoping it to be not too far off, but it's still going to be a couple of days before we can confirm when that's going to happen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Neil. That was Neil Walker from Waka Kotahi. It is just coming up to 20 minutes past 5. I'm Nita Blake-Person in for Lisa Owen tonight. We're keen for your feedback on anything you might have heard from the election campaign trail today, or if you're out on the road and it's safe to do so, let us know how your journey's going. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Silver Ferns and the Black Caps will resume international play next month, with both sports being given the all-clear to host international teams. The Silver Ferns will host England in a 3-test series in Hamilton, with the first test on Wednesday, October 28th. New Zealand Cricket has also confirmed today that the West Indies and Pakistan will play against the Black Caps over November, December and January, with the schedule to be released next week. All international sides will quarantine for 14 days after arriving, with players able to train as a squad after 4 days, provided they test negative for COVID-19 on day 3. Netball New Zealand Chief Executive Jenny Wiley told sports editor Stephen Hewson the series between the world champion Silver Ferns and England, the Commonwealth Games gold medalists, is significant, as it'll be the first international netball globally since January.
Netball New Zealand is covering the cost that the government are passing on to us, and we'll also be looking after the landed cost of the England team. We acknowledge it's an extraordinary time, and that's how we'll be able to play that out.
How's that going to affect, the financial implications of making some money from the series?
Netball New Zealand has been looking at pulling back costs for this whole year. We've suspended programs, etc., because the viability of an international test series was always going to be uncertain. So as we go into the back end, if we're able to get crowds, this will just make it all sort of financially viable.
Financially viable in the sense what you hope to break even, or make some money on top of that?
What we're hoping across the test series is we'll be at a break-even position. But we've been really well supported by our partners this year, and that's really made us able to enter into this kind of arrangement with England and make sure that we get some test match netball this year, which is the most important part.
What's it going to cost you quarantine-wise?
I think all the costs we're still working through with government in terms of what those final costs are. They are slightly different from a Kiwi returning home because we're going to need to be able to secure it independently of the New Zealand public. So we're all working through all those costs at the moment, but they're not insignificant. Given
where we were a few months ago, the mere fact you've got a series must be a huge sense of relief. But at what point did you finally sort of realise, yes, we are going to be able to make this happen?
We've known for about a week that we'll be able to enter into this negotiation with the English Roses. A few months ago, here we were saying, look, if there's no test match netball and there's no ANZ Premiership, we've got a big problem for ourselves and financially, as well as a calendar for the Silver Ferns. So where we've been working with government for a couple of months on, is this viable? We needed to understand our liability going into this in terms of health and safety, and look at what was right for the team. But I think ultimately, we're at a point where, because of all of that planning, we're going to be about one of the first netball test matches in the world played post-COVID or, as we come out of COVID. So I think it's fantastic for women's sport to be able to have this opportunity and for these athletes to be out on the world stage in front of fans.
What about their reaction? I mean, how have they felt? I suppose the COVID lockdown hasn't quite been the same for England. So is the sense, do you think this is a bigger deal for New Zealand, or how's England going to feel about getting to play some netball too?
Well, yeah, I think what's really important for the netball landscape is the last time any test match netball was played was January. And in that sort of scheme of things, that's significant. England has not had a domestic series this year, so they really wanted to be able to get those athletes out there on that world stage. And I think the same thing for the Australian team. They did not participate in the quad series at the front end of this year, so they will not be having any international test match netball this year. So I think from a performance perspective, no international team wants to lose momentum as we build into Com Games and Netball World Cup. So it's incredibly important. And England was great to work with. We've had some really robust conversations about the risk and what it means, but they're keen for visibility of their team. They've got a brand new coach, and the Kiwis are coming off the back of a World Cup in 2019, so it's important to keep that momentum.
Netball New Zealand Chief Executive Jenny Wiley talking to our sports editor, Stephen Hewson there. The All Blacks will be the first major New Zealand side to play a home international since the COVID-19 outbreak when they play the Wallabies in Wellington on October 11th and in Auckland a week later. And after 6 o'clock tonight, we'll hear from Sports Minister Grant Robertson about the cost of hosting international sports teams and getting the All Blacks out of quarantine in time for Christmas. Officials have identified 35 close contacts of the 3 community COVID-19 cases who travelled to Taupō. 8 have returned negative test results, while the rest have been or are in the process of being tested and are self-isolating. It's as businesses in Taupō say they're disappointed and shocked the family visited recently. Most have reopened for business after closing to deep clean, but one says they've received abusive messages and want people to follow health rules instead of placing blame. Chen Liu reports.
The family travelled to Taupō between September 18th and 20th, visiting places including Debrett's Spa Resort, Tandem Skydiving, KFC, Subway and the Z petrol station. Operations manager at the Taupō Debrett's Spa Resort, Mirela Petra, says the family just visited the hot springs and didn't use other facilities last Friday. She says staff members are considered casual contacts and while not required to get tested, they've been told to be vigilant. The business closed early last night for a deep clean and reopened this morning.
We are emptying out our outdoor pools and indoor pools, all the mineral pools. We are emptying every day. So that's a normal routine, but last night we've done a bigger disinfection, and also in the morning one of our contractors helped us with fogging, which is a deeper disinfection.
Ms. Petra is warning people to be cautious as the family went to a lot of places in different cities. But what's more concerning is that staff members have received abusive messages on the phone and social media.
It's not our fault, it's not this family's fault, nobody to know, and we just have to prepare and to follow the plan and to follow the public health instructions.
The family also visited Taupō Tandem Skydiving on Saturday. Its chief executive, Hamish Fanel, says at least 16 staff have been tested so far, with some returning negative results already, but is keeping his business shut until all the results are in and the deep clean is done, even if it means extra cost.
We haven't calculated a loss yet. The right thing to do is to shut the doors and suspend the operation until we know for sure that we can provide a safe service for the customers and for our staff.
Mr. Fanel says the person was asymptomatic when they came for the jump, so the risk should be low. He says there were 15 people on the aircraft the positive case was on, and health officials are tracing close contacts.
We're really just hopeful that the results come back negative and we get a quick resolution to it.
Taupō's Mayor David Trewivas says the townspeople are disappointed but carrying on with their normal lives. He says they are aware of contact tracing and hygiene practice, and he doesn't expect tourism in the town to be affected.
It's been handled very well at this stage. So early days, of course, but we're very, very confident that we've got it early and we've dealt to it.
In Taupō, the family met up with 18 others from 5 locations, including Bay of Plenty, Wellington, Christchurch and Hamilton, and those people are all considered close contacts. Hamilton Mayor Paula Southgate is warning Aucklanders about travelling.
A lot of this will remain on the shoulders of Aucklanders. If they are travelling out of Auckland, they've got to wear face masks, sanitise their hands and keep proper distance from people, because otherwise we're only one Aucklander away from a spread.
There are 2 new cases of COVID-19, one in managed isolation, while the other is a community case linked to the Auckland August cluster.
The cricketing world is remembering the former Australian batsman Dean Jones, who's died suddenly in India at the age of 59. He played 52 tests for Australia and 164 one-day internationals and was a lively, if controversial, figure in the commentary booth. As the ABC's James Oaten reports, Dean Jones was beloved almost as much in India, where he commentated on the country's Premier League, as he was in Australia.
Dean Jones had an illustrious career on and off the pitch, but it was in India in 1986 that he put on one of his best performances, scoring a double century in some of the harshest conditions.
Because it was hot, it was Chennai, it was sweltering.
That's international cricket commentator Prakash Wakankar. The test match against India ended in a tie, Jones's efforts became legendary.
He lost God knows how much body fluid. If I recall correctly, he actually spent time in the hospital afterwards getting IV drips. It's not about whether Australia tied the game or would have lost or won it. I think the spirit of endurance, fighting against all odds.
Atul Wasan was a pace bowler for India in the early 1990s. He came up against Dean Jones in his first international one-day tour.
And I saw him stepping out of a corner of my eye. And those days, you never used to step out to a fast bowler. And I just stopped midway and I was staring at him. And, he was a very cheeky guy. And he looked at me, he said, "Is this not allowed?" So I was taken aback. So this is the kind of player he was. He was always trying to get under your skin.
Jones was a favourite on television screens across India. As well as cricket commentary, he hosted his own program, providing a bit of fun along with his expertise.
Excuse me, Professor Dino?
Yeah, he was a game changer, because that was the time when TV was trying to find something unique, something out of the box to offer, and he provided that with his cloak and his, valedictorian kind of a thing.
News of his death swept quickly across Indian media. Cricketing legends took to social media to pay their respects. Sachin Tendulkar tweeted the news was absolutely heartbreaking, while Virat Kohli said he was shocked to hear about the tragic loss. For commentator Prakash Wakankar, it wasn't just Dean Jones's expertise that made him a favourite, it was his personality.
I think amongst the many other reasons that Dino was so loved and liked was, I think, above all, his approachability. I think he was accessible. He wasn't the typical celebrity. I think he, in some ways, embodied for me that classical Aussie spirit of saying, I am a person.
That report by James Oaten. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Sports Minister Grant Robertson on the cost of hosting international sports teams and whether the All Blacks will be home for Christmas. Australia struggles to fill job vacancies in the regions, and a cheeky Kia called Ken creates a commotion in a Nelson living room. We'd love your feedback. Let us know if you're stuck in holiday traffic or not. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susanna Leotawa with the headlines.
A Taupō spa business has received abusive messages from customers after a family who later tested positive for COVID-19 visited them last week. The family travelled to the town between September the 18th and 20th, visiting at least 15 locations. Mirella Petra from the Taupō de Brett Spa Resort says no one is to blame and is calling for people to now follow health rules. An independent review has found allegations of racism against Māori academics at Waikato University to be incorrect and inaccurate. The inquiry says universities adhere to Western traditions and cultures, making a case for structural, systemic and casual discrimination. The Transport Agency is advising motorists to consider avoiding Auckland's Harbour Bridge this evening as holidaymakers head north, putting extra pressure on the damaged bridge. Teams are also out preparing it for a battering from severe weather expected to hit most of the country over the weekend. Neil Walker from Wakakotahi told Checkpoint the bridge could be closed if it's affected by the forecast high winds. Winston Peters has been accused of spouting lies during a speech today. A leader of the Ihu Mātau occupation has called the speech by the New Zealand First Leader, which hit out at protesters, disgusting. Mr Peters says they sought to overturn a legitimate sale and that they have no standing with respect to the land. The Labour Party leader says National is misguided in its plan to drive a reduction in child poverty by targeting children suffering material hardship. Jacinda Ardern says there are more practical measures, such as Labour's food and schools program, which National hasn't supported. She says a broader approach is better. The Silver Ferns and the Black Caps will host international sides over the next couple of months following government approval to allow teams in. Netball New Zealand has confirmed the Silver Ferns will host England in a 3-test series in Hamilton next month, while the West Indies and Pakistan will play series against the Black Caps from November to January. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Turning to business news now with Emma Hatton. Well, there's more information out this afternoon, Emma, from Air New Zealand about what its plans are to ride out the pandemic.
That's right, Nita. So the company put a statement out this afternoon giving an update on its money situation, and it said that $900 million government loan, which it was made available to it in March, has started to be used, and it's going to use that money while it figures out a plan. So its shape, its size, what it's going to need to do, what it's going to need to look like in order to be a viable business going forward. And of course, their struggles because of the pandemic are well documented. $454 million full year loss last year, mammoth scale backs, writing down the value of their assets, redundancies, restructures, grounding their international fleet, planes parked in the Californian desert, you name it, they've done it. And it has said for some time that it will basically have to be a domestic carrier for the foreseeable future. And the pandemic is lasting a lot longer than the industry originally thought it would. So it's currently basically just burning through its cash while it figures that out. Burning through about $65 to $85 million a month. Jeez. That $900 million loan from the government was made available to it once its cash reserves fell below an undisclosed level. So we now know that it's using that loan. So obviously its reserves are starting to be tapped out. So it says it will have finished, finding itself by early 2021, and it will be in a position to proceed with a capital raising before June, provided there's no huge upset in the market between now and then. They don't want any more surprises than they've already had, and it is likely to be a share issue through the public market. What happens to that $900 million loan? Well, the government could turn it into shares. It already owns 52% of the company. So whether it will be a public offer that matches that amount, so $900 million worth of shares on the open market to sort of keep that ratio, we don't know what it could look like, but I guess we'll find out in due course.
We certainly will. Thanks, Emma. Can you tell us what a test case in the UK could mean for business interruption insurance back here?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a niche legal story, but it's quite fascinating, and it could impact on business owners here. So the High Court in London recently pushed through a test case, so not a real case, but it just wanted to work through some of the legalities of business interruption insurance policies, in a legal environment, just to tease out some of the wording. And business interruption is a type of cover that businesses get to protect them if their business is damaged, so fire or flood. It generally is to do with physical damage to their business. But there are a lot of extensions you can get on top of that. So, for instance, you might have a prevention of access cover, which means if your building is blocked off or something and it's not actually damaged, but people can't get to it, you can still get cover because there's interruption and so on and so on. So what this test case did is it looked at a number of things, but one thing that could be influential in New Zealand is something called prevention of access by public authority wordings, i.e. loss arising from the prevention of access to the premises as a consequence of a public authority action. Does that sound familiar?
I see where we're going
Director
here.
General of Health preventing people from accessing their premises. So this is an extension that some people will have on their policies. And the court in London found that some of these policies, the wording in them, people could actually be covered for them. So Chapman Tripp, massive law firm here, they're saying, look, a test case in New Zealand could be really beneficial. It could happen quite quickly if insurers were on board. Would they want to be on board? Who knows? It's all up in the air. But it could be really interesting if, I guess, someone makes the first move.
That'd be fascinating. Yeah, huge implications. Another one, Hallenstein's Glasson's full-year results announced today. Any surprises there?
Yeah, it was actually quite surprising. Given all the troubles that we've heard from the retail sector, you would expect it to be quite dire, but their full-year profit was actually not that different from their full-year profit the year before. So they made $27.8 million. Last year they made $29 million. And this is, of course, with all of the lockdowns in New Zealand and Australia. And the lack of foot traffic, it didn't seem to have much of an impact, and that's because online just went through the roof. Online shopping for the second half of the year now made up a third of all their sales, and that was due to the amount sold online jumping by 80%. So everyone was going pretty hard with the old add to cart. And Hallenstein's, they had a bit of trouble with their tailoring, aspect, the suits and that, obviously weddings and workwear, you didn't really need to get the old suit out. But overall, the company held up really, really well. Investors seem to love it. Share price jumped about 20% during the day. So, they've managed to keep it pretty straight all the way through.
Not a bad result at all.
Not
hey,
at
Emma,
all.
can you bring us up to date on the markets today?
Yep, so NZX Top 50 Index had quite a strong session to end the week. Finished up 107 points, 0.9% at 11,797 points. The US dollar, Kiwis trading 65.6 US cents, 92.8 Australian and 51.4 British pence.
Thank you so much. That's our business reporter, Emma Hatton. Winston Peters says New Zealand's border will reopen sooner than people think and mass immigration should be consigned to the past. With foreign arrivals flatlining, we asked the main political parties what the future of immigration should look like. Labour says there will be a new normal, while National wants to introduce a tech visa, ushering in highly skilled overseas workers and entrepreneurs. Jill Bonnet filed this report.
Immigration is still a serious issue for this election. And what we do after this, hopefully, is not to learn nothing from it and go down the same pathway as the previous Labour National Party governments did.
Border restrictions may not have killed the immigration debate at this election, but they may have made it more complicated. Labour says it's not realistic to set numbers on new residents and temporary workers in the current climate. Its immigration spokesperson, Chris Farfoy, says COVID has forced industry to reconsider where its workforce comes from.
From the very first moment I became the Minister of Immigration a couple of months ago, we were sending a strong message to sectors who were crying out for labour from offshore that they had to start rethinking things for the medium and long term. As we start seeing the effect that COVID has on New Zealand workers, we start prioritising them and the training opportunities and the wage opportunities that will come about of that as well.
Chris Farfoy says Labour wants to open up a quota within the managed isolation places for skilled workers and investors, but in the short term, immigration numbers will still be low. So COVID changes everything, or does it? The Green Party says principles should stay the same. It wants to put fairness at the front and centre of the immigration system. Its immigration spokesperson, Golriz Garaman, says it wants refugee numbers to rise. And she says the immigration system should work efficiently and transparently.
The residence program, I think, has been a source of real stress and anxiety for migrants, and it has felt really exploitative of New Zealand to let people in and have them integrate into our system to give their labour or their money in terms of education and then not be able to settle. I think setting arbitrary numbers by political parties has been the cause of that.
The National Party immigration spokesperson, Stuart Smith, also says the residence numbers should be led by business needs rather than government targets.
Anyone thinks they can sit back with a whiteboard and plan how many people we need exactly is naive.
He says immigration is about filling gaps in the economy, and a large failure of the border policy has been not allowing desperately needed workers into the country. Mr Smith says in time, the technology sector under National could equal dairy in terms of revenue, with fast-tracked processes for overseas investors and entrepreneurs and tech visas for skilled workers.
We'd relax the requirements for an investor class visa so that we could make it much less red tape involved and get a very attractive destination for those high net worth investors and technology entrepreneurs to come in, and that would really help our tech sector move to the next level.
Judith Collins also announced yesterday National's plans to allow skilled and seasonal workers back into the country. ACT's immigration spokesperson James McDowell says it remains a pro-immigration party, but New Zealand is in a state of flux.
We have an opportunity to use our relatively COVID-free status, our ability to manage the virus well, to attract extraordinarily skilled people, investors and other productive individuals to New Zealand. The immigration numbers have plummeted this year, and with all of the expat New Zealanders coming home, things have shifted. The skills landscape has shifted massively.
He says the border reopening involves treating low-risk countries differently to others. And he says the immigration point system had become complex and arbitrary and not necessarily focused on the right things. New Zealand First wants to take the immigration portfolio if it's part of the next government. Its leader, Winston Peters, says wholesale and low-skilled immigration in the last 3 decades created dysfunctional supply and demand in housing, health and infrastructure.
We can run immigration properly in our interests, that is, bring people here who we desperately need, not people who desperately need us. Let me tell you, I can't find any other country in the free world that's gone down the path that we previously inherited and which we're trying to turn back now.
He says global investors must also only be allowed in on New Zealand's terms. Among parties not currently in Parliament, the Maori Party promised this week it would halt all immigration until housing supply catches up with demand. The new Conservative Party also has a net zero immigration policy while housing demand eases, with student visas and seasonal workers excluded. The Opportunities Party would hold a royal commission into immigration needs and effects, and meantime restrict visas to jobs in skills shortage areas and students at postgraduate level. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
Some of Christchurch's earthquake-damaged red zone land is another step closer to having some long-term decisions made about its future. Today, the Minister of Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, formally handed over ownership of 70 hectares of land to the Christchurch City Council. The land gifted to the council is in the coastal suburbs of South Shore, South Brighton and Brooklands, where residents have been waiting almost a decade to find out what the future holds for their area. Rachel Graham has more.
South Shore resident Denise George says it's been a long wait, but hopefully now the residents can have some certainty about what will happen with the land.
We've got lots of ideas and now we'll be able to actually for certain say, well, OK, we can perhaps start planning for the future. And we are in the middle of actually starting. We've had a done survey about 7 years ago of what we wanted from the red zone, and we're going to build that up and have another survey.
Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell says up until now, the council hasn't been able to make decisions about what happens in the red zone, as it wasn't its land. She says questions like whether there could be some temporary housing in the areas are yet to be decided on. But she says they can now start discussions with the area's residents and others. Ms Dalzell wants the land to be governed in a new way.
What I'm thinking about is co-governance, which actually brings the council to the table with mana whenua and with the community, so that it isn't actually governed by an organisational structure, Christchurch City Council, but actually the governance belongs with the people.
Leanne Dalzell says the ownership of the land will bring some costs for the council, as it will need to look into issues around stormwater management and coastal erosion. The Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, says it is an important milestone in terms of the city being returned to local leadership.
The expectation for me is that the people of Christchurch will make decisions about how this land will be used, that it is the time for the community to come to the fore. Over the last decade we've heard so many ideas and people's hopes and dreams for what is such a taonga for our city now, of how that could be used.
Also handed over to the Christchurch City Council today was the former home of renowned artist Bill Sutton, which sits in Richmond, another suburb with red-zoned land. Bill Sutton died in 2000, but the property's owner at the time of the earthquakes, Neil Roberts, had a covenant placed to protect the home, and it was purchased as part of the red zone buyouts. Dame Anne Herkis, who is on the Sutton Heritage House and Garden Charitable Trust, says Bill Sutton was one of New Zealand's finest landscape painters, and arguably Christchurch's best artist. She says everywhere around the house, which was designed by sculptor Tom Taylor, there are stories of the past, including the leather Edwardian chair which many judges sat in to have their portraits painted, the lush garden which Bill Sutton planted, and his paintings which grace the walls. Dame Anne says the building will be used as a community space with lectures and functions when it's not in use as an artist's residence.
For several months of the year, it's going to be the home to artists and residents who are picked by the Trust and brought in for periods of a month or 2 or 3, max of 3, and who live in the house and paint in the house. And we've talked to budding artists, or established artists for that matter, who say they think it would be a dream come true to be able to paint here, because the magic is still here.
The home is expected to be open to the public by the end of the year. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
It is almost 11 minutes to 6. I'm Nita Blakeperson and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. If you've heard anything you want to get in touch with about tonight, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Today marks 6 months since the country entered full lockdown. At 11:59 on March 25th, the country moved into level 4, introducing some of the strictest public health measures seen anywhere in the world. Now, half a year on, how do New Zealanders remember that time? What do they make of the past 6 months? And what impact has it had on all our lives? Harry Locke has been finding out.
RNZ News at midnight. New Zealand is now in a 4-week lockdown to stop the spread of COVID-19.
A state of national emergency has been declared today due to COVID-19 at 12:21 by the Minister of Civil Defence.
I have one simple message for New Zealanders today as we head into the next 4 weeks. Stay at home. It will break the chain of transmission and it will save lives.
6 months ago, or 184 days ago, New Zealand went into lockdown. At the time, Simon Bridges was leader of the National Party, David Clark was Health Minister, and Ian Lee-Scalloway Immigration Minister. It's been a busy 6 months, although some, like New Plymouth-based hairstylist Faith Garrick, struggle to believe it's been that long.
Oh my gosh, it's been 6 months. It's so crazy.
It's been a surreal, at times unbelievable, period of New Zealand's and the entire world's history. For Francine Scott from Dunedin, it's been an eventful time.
I've changed jobs, separated from a partner, changed house the day before lockdown, been through depression and recovering on the other side of it. I think it's brought my family closer together. It's made us stronger as a unit.
Looking back at the month the country was at level 4, the curbs to personal freedom were unprecedented. A quick recap. Everyone was staying local in their bubbles, only essential services and businesses stayed open, and all educational facilities shut. Through the adversity, Claire Mackay in Wellington developed something new.
With this lockdown, I've been able to build my relationship a lot more because we sort of had to isolate separately. So we were able to talk a lot more, and every time we called every day, we had to think of something to talk about. So we actually got to know each other a lot more.
While Andrew Douglas changed habits.
Lockdown was dope because I've done a lot of dumb stuff and I drink and that kind of stuff, so it was nice just being like, not feeling any of that pressure to go out or anything. I was just like, you want to come out? Nah, there's a lockdown, we're in a pandemic, I'm going to stay at home in my PJs. Yeah, that couch was beautiful.
But level 4 wasn't easy for everyone, such as teacher aide Lisa Glavey.
Yep, I didn't get a job that I was supposed to get because of the lockdown and having a cold and not being able to go into the job straight away. And they had to give it to someone else, so...
Meanwhile, the distance from family hit Derek Quigley particularly hard.
Being an Aucklander and being able to go on holiday down the country, or being able to go and visit my sister in Melbourne, or, the first lockdown was really tough because my mum is at a village with, lots of elderly people, so, that was really tough.
Just over a month later, on April 27th, the country moved down to level 3 for 2 and a bit weeks, until level 2 was welcomed in on May 13th. Then, on June 8th, Level 1 brought back crowds at sports games, dancing in bars, and gatherings of all sizes. While things like mask wearing, hand sanitising and QR code scanning aren't as alien as they once were, there are harder things for people to accept. Take Brendan from Hamilton, for example.
We're getting married next month, so quite a few of our overseas guests obviously can't come. That's unfortunate. That's taken us a while to come to terms with.
The reality of having borders closed and with little prospect of them opening anytime soon is tough for Joshua Steele.
It's definitely odd getting used to not being able to go overseas and realising that that will probably be the case for the next year or so, which is a little bit daunting, to be honest.
Looking back at the entire 6 months, Matthias Te Moana Nui is optimistic.
I tend to look at the positives of it, and I'm quite hopeful for the future. I feel a sense of renewal from everything that's happened. There's a lot of things that have been brought to the forefront of the public's minds, and I'm excited to see where they go with it.
The country celebrated 100 days of no community transmission on August 10th. But just 2 days later, a new case was announced in Auckland. The virus's return has served as a reminder that with 6 months down, there's still a long way to go. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
Well, he's not your usual Sunday morning visitor, but a cheeky Kia has managed to let himself into a Nelson living room as part of his new routine of calling in on houses in a suburban neighbourhood. While backyard tui and weka are common in Glenduan, Ken the Kia is a new addition and he's making himself quite at home. Ken has been taunting pets, tearing up gardens and taking bits and pieces off houses. Vanessa Gay was paid a visit by Ken last week and she woke to the sound of her cat making a commotion in the living room.
I was like, oh, that's really strange. There must be a cat or something, trying to come in because she's was just about losing the plot. And she was probably, I would say, half a metre away from this bird that was sticking his nose in the door. And so I sort of, looked up and went, oh, that's a Kia. What the heck is a Kia doing in the house at 7:15 in the morning on a Sunday morning? Because we're in a residential area, so it's very strange to be seeing a Kia. So he kind of shooed outside and then proceeded to sort of play with items around sort of the deck and in the garden and tried to pull the door strips, the seals off the windows on the doors, caps off fences, played with some shoes that were sitting on the deck, played with some flowers in the garden, pulled some of those off the trees, and when I went out to go and see what he was doing, he would try and chase me back inside. So I was like, oh no, I don't really want to engage with this bird because I really don't want, it's not good for him to be sort of engaging with me, and it's not good for me to be engaging with him because I don't want to encourage his behaviour. I tried very hard not to engage with him, but I was very inquisitive about what he was up to. And he was, very, very playful, very inquisitive, very, very bold, very bold.
So,
not frightened of me at all.
So Ken had initially let himself into your place before making himself quite at home?
Yes. Yes. And I did shoo him outside. So he did. He came inside and walked around the bedroom and then went back outside. And meanwhile, the cat sort of worked out that she's really not going to take him on because he's quite a big bird. And while she is a Maine Coon, she kind of was like a little bit cautious of the size of him and the confidence of him. So she very wisely exited.
Confident, all right. So he wasn't deterred by you or the cat or anything else. What do we know? What he's looking for?
I suspect that he was just being playful and just inquisitive. I don't know whether he's looking for companionship, but he certainly was confident enough of me that kind of makes you think that he's interacted with humans before and he's actually been fed by them, and so he's had some positive reinforcements from humans, which is concerning. Because you really don't want them in a residential area. I mean, the damage that they cause on forestry sites, or even like when you park your car up at ski resorts or whatever, and they pull things off your wipers, etc., which is just them being playful. But you really don't want them in a residential area because you've got a cheeky Kia coming inside and helping itself.
A very cheeky Kia. But this isn't the only incident. He's been popping up a bit around the community, hasn't he? So what are other people experiencing?
So other people are sort of experiencing very similar things, like he's very, very bold. He doesn't seem to be frightened of cats or dogs. Definitely keen to interact with humans. I think, it's almost like he does want some company, but he really needs to go and have company from his own kind. And I think from what I understand from the Care Conservation Trust and their information, Andrea Goodman, who's the person that I've been interacting with about him, is that he is a young male, and they sort of, because their other Kias are currently breeding at the moment, they sort of leave, I guess, their group and they go off exploring and just like a young male bird sort of trying to find his own way, and then hopefully he'll go back and find some other lovely Kias to hang out with. Like, he's very, very engaging, and like you do want to interact with him because it's such a privilege to have him, to have sight of him and to be able to see him. But it's not good for him or us or the community to have him sticking around.
For more than 65 years, James Bond has been shaking and stirring first readers and now film-goers alike. He doesn't really exist, of course, but it turns out there may have been a real Mr. Bond. This report from the BBC's Tim Allman.
What is it? You don't know what this is. He is the world's most famous spy. 007, Licence to Kill, you know the rest. James Bond's latest adventure, No Time to Die, is due in cinemas, COVID willing, later this year. That is the fiction. But here, in Poland's Cold War archives, facts have emerged about a previously unheard of British agent with a very familiar name, Bond. James Albert Bond. He came to Poland in the early 60s working as an archivist at the British Embassy, but there seems to be much more to him than that.
We know he spent almost a year in Poland. He worked at the military attaché office. He showed interest in military facilities. He liked women, just like his literary namesake, but there is not a word in the files about martinis. However, there is information that he liked Polish beer.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. A taupo business is calling for vigilance rather than blame after being visited by a family who have since tested positive for COVID-19. The family travelled to the town between Friday and Sunday of last week, and health authorities have now identified 15 locations they visited while possibly infectious. One of those was the Taupo de Bret's Spa Resort, and operations manager Mirella Petra says they've reopened after a deep clean overnight.
We just to be vigilant with our symptoms because this family visited a lot of activities in Taupo. Taupo is known as a good destination, and probably the virus is still around, so we just have to be very vigilant.
Mirella Petra from Taupo de Bret Spa Resort. The National Party leader has accused her Labour counterpart of not caring about the mining industry on the West Coast. Both Judith Collins and Jacinda Ardern have been campaigning in the region today. Ms Ardern says it's wrong to assume West Coasters are interested only in mining, and she believes she has strong support from the West Coast community. But Ms Collins disagrees.
Mining is important on the West Coast. I understand that she doesn't care about where the minerals and metals that go into her iPhone come from, but some of us do.
National Party leader Judith Collins. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters denies he was race-baiting with his speech lashing out at the protesters at Ihumātao. Speaking in Orewa, north of Auckland, Mr Peters says his party stopped a deal from being reached over the disputed land near Auckland Airport by refusing to invoke the agree to disagree clause in the coalition agreement. He says the protesters are living in the past, and if a deal is done over that land, it risks sparking a new wave of treaty claims. But Mr Peters says he isn't pulling the race card.
I'm here saying how important it is for everybody in this country, including Maori, to have a unity pathway forward. We can't go ahead with this business. I've said it all my career. Don't come along and be shallow and say I'm race baiting, because it couldn't be more false.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters. Met Service is warning most of the country will experience high winds, heavy rain and even snow in some areas over the weekend. Meteorologist Tom Adams says severe gales will spread up the South Island tomorrow before reaching the lower North Island by the end of the day, with Fiordland and Westland also expecting heavy rain. On Sunday morning, potentially damaging winds are forecast for Canterbury and the lower North Island. Mr Adams says the extensive nature of the storm is unusual.
The key things we're talking about with this event is, first of all, just how widespread it is, particularly the wind. But wind and snow are the two main things with this one.
Tom Adams says an Antarctic blast bringing snow to 300 metres in the far south will round off the weekend on Sunday night. Aucklanders heading away for the school holidays are facing slow trips on parts of the motorway network this evening. However, head of journeys at Waka Kotahi, the transport agency, Neil Walker, says the traffic is not as bad as expected for the Friday rush hour, while 2 lanes on Auckland Harbour Bridge remain closed after damage from a truck last week. Mr Walker told Checkpoint there could be restricted speeds or or closures on the bridge on Sunday, with strong winds forecast. He says traffic there is flowing reasonably well at the moment compared with other congested areas.
We've seen quite a bit of traffic on State Highway 1 heading south, so out of the city, and there's also a bit on State Highway 20 at the moment around the airport area. So it looks like what we'd expect to see when people going away for a long weekend.
Waka Kotahi Head of Journeys, Neil Walker. The Christchurch mosque terrorist has not appealed his lifelong sentence for the murder of 51 people on March the 15th last year. The 20 working day appeal timeframe lapsed yesterday, and the Court of Appeal confirmed today it has received no appeal of the sentence. The Christchurch Mayor wants to see a new form of governance for the earthquake-damaged red-zoned land, which has been gifted to Council. Today, the government transferred ownership to the Christchurch City Council of 70 hectares of red-zoned land in Brooklands, South Shore and South Brighton, and the former house of renowned artist Bill Sutton in Richmond. The Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell said she'd like to see a rethink of land ownership and community involvement.
What I'm thinking about is co-governance, which actually brings the council to the table with mana whenua and with the community.
Leanne Dalzell says she thinks of the land as a gift to the people of Christchurch, not to the council. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The Silver Ferns and the Black Caps will host international sides in New Zealand over the next few months following government approval to allow teams in. Netball New Zealand has confirmed the Silver Ferns will host England in a 3-test series in Hamilton next month, while the West Indies and Pakistan will play against the Black Caps in November, December and January. All international sides will quarantine for 14 days after arrival, with players able to train as a squad 4 days in, dependent returning a negative COVID-19 test. The Silver Ferns' first test will be on October the 28th. However, New Zealand Cricket has confirmed the Black Caps won't head across the Tasman in January to play 3 planned one-dayers against Australia. New Zealand MMA star Israel Adesanya is predicting it will be all one-way traffic when he defends his UFC world title this weekend. With a 19-win, no-loss record, the reigning New Zealand Sportsman of the Year faces a fellow unbeaten fighter in Brazil's Paulo Costa in Abu Dhabi on Sunday.
People say it's the fight of the year, like Dana White said, but that's only if he's tough enough to actually take a beating from me for 5 rounds. But I just don't think his gas tank's going to hold up. But I'm not downplaying the stakes. I feel like for my legacy, it's just the look of it. Like I've said, people are still fooled by muscles.
Israel Adesanya. The Los Angeles Lakers are just one win away from the NBA basketball finals after a 114-108 win over the Denver Nuggets in Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals. They're now 3-1 up in the best-of-7 series. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We've heard from 7 witnesses so far, and effectively they've all said that even if you find that avenue, no one believes you.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
I think it would be highly controversial to look at replacing New Zealand as a name, but there are lots of precedents in the world.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Partly cloudy with isolated showers in the west. Scattered rain spreading south tomorrow afternoon and evening. Waikato to Wellington, including central high country. Fine spells, scattered showers tonight, some heavy. Light rain developing late tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine apart from a few showers in Wairarapa. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago mainly fine. Isolated showers for Canterbury and North Otago, possibly heavy with hail. Norwesterlies rising to severe gale in Canterbury, high country tomorrow night. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, fine spells and isolated showers. Rain about the Otago headwaters tomorrow night. Northerlies rising to severe gale in exposed places tomorrow night also. Bulla to Fiordland, scattered showers turning to rain in Fiordland tomorrow afternoon, then spreading north and becoming heavy with possible thunderstorms. Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks so much, Susanna. Kia ora koutou and welcome back to Checkpoint. I'm Nita Blake-Person in for Lisa Owen. Cricket and netball are the latest sports to be given the green light to host international tours and tests in New Zealand. It was confirmed today that the West Indies and Pakistan cricket teams will tour New Zealand this summer, with the Silver Ferns to host England in a 3-test series starting next month. It comes after the Wallabies were given the all-clear to play 2 tests in Wellington and Auckland against the All Blacks. They touch down later tonight to begin their managed isolation. Sports Minister Grant Robertson says other sporting codes are also able to make their case for bringing touring teams here, with safety provisions paramount. I spoke to Grant Robertson a short time ago and asked whether the government had become involved in efforts to keep the All Blacks out of isolation over Christmas.
We're continuing to work with New Zealand Rugby. Clearly our view is that we should have a rugby championship that sticks to the original dates that were agreed between New Zealand Rugby and Rugby Australia, but that's primarily a matter for them to sort out.
So are those discussions you are privy to on a kind of day-to-day level, or are you leaving it to the sporting bodies themselves?
Oh, no, very much leaving it to the sporting bodies to do the work, but clearly, we have a good relationship with New Zealand Rugby, and we've worked closely with them to facilitate the Bledisloe Cup games taking place and to support them in participating in the Rugby Championship. But the day-to-day work on that is the responsibility of the various sporting bodies in these different situations.
So no formal requests as of yet that would mean the All Blacks can spend Christmas with their families?
Look, obviously that's what we all want, is for the All Blacks to be able to spend Christmas with their families. Clearly we also have consistent rules around managed isolation and quarantine. So, we'll work through this. There's a bit of time between now and when the games are played, but we're just going to support New Zealand Rugby the best we can.
Would you be open to making any changes if that request was made?
Look, that's not something we're looking at the moment. We've been very consistent about the fact that 14 days isolation is required by everybody who comes back into New Zealand. That was facilitated via the original timetable for the Rugby Championship, and people could be back, the rugby players could be back off home with their families. So, let's see how discussions go over the next few weeks.
So the Wallabies arriving here tonight, can we confirm the conditions of their managed isolation? Are they going through the same process that all returning Kiwis are?
They are. What we have been able to do, as has been previously announced, is facilitate, with advice from the Ministry of Health, the ability for the team to train. So everybody in the team comes in, they have to have a day 3 test. If that day 3 test comes back negative for the whole team, that then allows the team to begin training, but they stay within their bubble and they stay in the managed isolation facility right through to the end of their 14 days.
And that managed isolation facility, that has the same personnel and protocols that all returning Kiwis are going through?
Absolutely. It is in fact one of our existing isolation facilities.
And so with this further boost with these teams that have been announced today and other codes and things, those same conditions will apply for them as well?
That's right. I mean, we've been working closely with the codes and the Ministry of Health on making sure that teams can train and do what they need to do to be ready to play, but at the same time they're within our managed isolation program. We've got all the protocols, all the health staff, all the health checks, everything that you would expect from anybody who's in there. Really the only difference here is the facilitation of training, which is obviously important for athletes who we expect to be able to perform at a high level fairly soon after they leave from isolation.
So with these other codes, does that mean that everyone is going to go to the same part of the country or somewhere it's easy for all of those trainings to take place? Is everyone going to go to Christchurch, for example?
Those final details are still being worked through with our managed isolation team, but clearly we're able to use that facility for the Wallabies, and there's an ability to use a secure training facility as well. Each sport has slightly different needs, and so they're just being finalised at the moment, but all of them will be going through the same kind of secure, safe facilities that we currently use.
Who's footing the bill for all of these sports teams coming out here through those MIQ?
So the teams are paying, and I think that's what everybody would expect, actually. And obviously, we've been able to work out a cost that is covers, the costs of those their time in managed isolation. That's similar to what happens for business people who are coming back for particular roles as well, or coming in for particular roles. So, that's been worked through with the codes. Clearly, these games represent a fantastic opportunity for New Zealanders to see quality sport, but they're also economic development opportunities for the cities and places where the games are played. So there's a good return on this, but we do expect the teams to be paying their way.
How much are they paying?
So it's a figure of around $7,000 per person. That is the full cost. You'll recall that we had a figure of around $3,000 that we're charging returning New Zealanders. That was only ever a contribution to costs. So we've worked that figure out with the teams that we believe that to be a reasonable figure that will cover the costs of their stay.
And you say that it's about economic development in part. Are the teams that are coming out here being chosen and the green light being given based on how much cash they're likely to inject into the economy?
No, not particularly. I mean, all international sporting teams coming to New Zealand playing games will have that effect, but this is something that the sports themselves have worked out. Obviously, in the case of cricket, you've got teams who were scheduled to travel here in terms of the West Indies and Pakistan. When it comes to netball, they've organised and negotiated that with England, who are in a position to come here, but that's very much been the decision of those sporting bodies. We haven't been dictating that in any way.
What happens if one of these players does test positive?
Well, sadly then, in the case of most of these things, that would probably mean the end of the tour or the tournament, because the clock would start again for the teams, and that would probably end up meaning that the games wouldn't be able to be played. And that's actually the risk that obviously the sports themselves are carrying. In order to be able to train as a group, they're taking the risk that if one of them gets sick, that effectively means the whole team has to stand down. If there were other arrangements where we had smaller bubbles, then perhaps you'd be able to manage that a bit differently. But that's where the sports have landed. Our Ministry of Health has said, well, we can manage the public health risk that way, but clearly if someone tests positive, then the clock restarts, and that may well mean we won't see those teams actually play.
If the All Blacks go to Australia and someone from Argentina tests positive as part of that tournament, is the whole thing off?
Well, again, that's totally a matter for SANZAAR and the Australian Rugby Union, who are the organisers of it. With our system, the system that we've got here, obviously people train in their bubbles and they're not able to get out of isolation until they have tested positive. So from our perspective, we've got a very clear process for that. You'd have to be talking to Rugby Australia and SANZAAR about how they would manage that if that occurred in the Rugby Championship.
In terms of the teams coming out here and that $7,000 figure, is it being factored in the health costs if one of those teams was to test positive and they have to be tied up in our health system?
Well, clearly that the costs are the costs of managed isolation and working through that. I would suspect that there would obviously be the teams themselves would come to arrangements around whether they stayed or whether they actually left, and whether some people stayed if they did test positive. But we factored in the costs of managing this, and that includes the health staff.
The economic benefits of these teams coming out here, I presume some of it is based on large crowds turning out to some of these games. As we kind of yo-yo in and out of levels, are you concerned that a lot of those games may not end up eventuating?
Oh, and I'm pretty confident we will be able to have crowds there. We're obviously in level 1 now. The teams and the sports have had to factor that in themselves, because they obviously, in many cases, are the ones who'll benefit from gate takings and so on, as well as those spillover economic benefits. And, there's been a bit of talk about the Bledisloe Cup games, that if Auckland was still at level 2, the Auckland game might get moved to somewhere that was at level 1. So I imagine all the sports are talking about that. But, we're going well as a country here, and as long as everybody keeps obeying the rules and keeps fulfilling what they need to do, we'll be able to stay at level 1 and have good crowds at the games.
And the Ramfurly Shield this weekend?
As a person who grew up down in Dunedin, I'm always keen to see Otago do well.
A renters advocacy group says tenants around the country are looking at rent increases of up to 30% as a freeze comes to an end. The government put a stop to rent increases from the start of the COVID-19 lockdown in March until today. On Parliament's lawn today, Renters United asked politicians to commit to supporting fairer rents and solutions to housing supply. Rachel Thomas was there.
Rent freeze! Don't go! Don't go! We love you so! Rent freeze! Don't go! Don't go! We love you so!
Carrot cake and balloons marked a reluctant, albeit small, farewell party on the Parliament lawn. Young renters saying goodbye to the rent freeze. The freeze was introduced at the end of March but ended today, meaning landlords can increase rental prices for the first time since the first lockdown. Ashok Jacob from Renters United says some tenants are now facing increases of $100 per week.
People all over the country are saying that their rent is increasing by 20 or 30% as soon as the freeze is over, almost as if just to make up the rent that they could have increased over the break. So We're agitating for an end to that kind of cruelty and inhumane treatment.
In an open letter to politicians, they want to see the government build more state and community housing and limits rent increases to inflation. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government anticipated rent increases once the freeze ended, which is why the Residential Tenancies Act was updated under urgency to limit rental increases to once every 12 months. While she wouldn't comment on the group's specific demands, she says the government made the changes with renters in mind.
If they do see an increase, that will be the only increase over their tenancy that can happen in a 12-month period, and I think that's really important.
The changes introduced in August also include a ban on rental bidding and 90-day no-cause terminations. The Green Party co-leader James Shaw says those limits are a good start, but perhaps they haven't gone far enough.
I'm appalled at some of the stories I've heard about some of the increases that some landlords are planning to do. If we are going to get through this crisis, I think people need to treat each other like human beings and just be a bit reasonable about what's going on here. You know, frankly, if some of the stories that we're hearing come to a reality, then yes, we are going to need to look at other regulatory measures.
The Green Party announced today that it will work to increase availability of community housing, including rent-to-own properties, if it's elected to the next government. Top candidate Jessica Hammond told the renters that they are suffering from an unfair tax system with no capital gains tax.
The average renter is paying, compared to 10 years ago, has to work an extra half a day every single week just to cover the average rent. We can change this by fixing the tax system. That will address the rampant property demand that is fueling house price growth.
She says a rental warrant of fitness should be mandatory and there should be more of a focus on medium-density housing. Ashok Jacob had one message for tenants facing a hit with rent costs.
You're not alone. This is something that's happening to so many people, myself included. We're facing uncertainty as to whether we're going to be able to put a roof over our heads over the next few months. But I'm hopeful about what we're doing here.
The open letter will be presented to politicians at an event in Wellington on the 3rd of October. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
It's 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Protesters are for the second night defying a curfew to take to the streets of the US city of Louisville after no police officers were directly charged with the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor in her home in March. Nearly 130 people were arrested during yesterday's demonstrations, including one person for shooting 2 officers. The BBC's Alim Makbul has this report.
Security forces flooded the streets of Louisville to contain the outrage felt by protesters here. They took to the streets because they felt Breonna Taylor and her family had been denied justice. The 26-year-old medical worker died when plainclothes police investigating an ex-boyfriend on drug offences burst into her home. Thinking they were intruders, her current partner fired a shot at them. 3 officers fired back, but it's been announced none will be charged for killing Breonna.
This is what we've been fighting for the whole time, for the last couple of months. All the injustice, all the racism, all the everything. This is just us being tired. No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
The tension increased into the night, but the crowds were starting to thin out when this happened. Shots suddenly rang out. 2 police officers were hit.
One is in alert and stable. The other officer is currently undergoing surgery and stable. We do have 1 suspect in custody.
He's been named as Lorenzo Johnson and has already been charged with first-degree assault.
Kentucky state law, this is an unlawful assembly.
But demonstrators feel this is just another example of clear double standards.
Where's the accountability for the cops, right? Because if I'm a citizen and I commit a crime, I'm held accountable for that crime. They need to be held accountable the same way that we are held accountable. And that's what we're out here fighting for, social justice.
The plainclothes officers who shot Breonna Taylor after bursting into her home won't face trial for killing her. But the list of grievances for those who say they are fighting for social justice just keeps being added to.
The BBC's Alim Makbul. The continued rise of New Zealand MMA reaches a new high point on Sunday. 4 fighters from Auckland City's kickboxing gym will compete at UFC 253 in Abu Dhabi, headlined by world champion Israel Adesanya defending his title. The reigning New Zealand Sportsman of the Year will be challenged by another undefeated fighter, Brazil's Paulo Costa. But as Clay Wilson reports, Adesanya heads into the battle with plenty of backup.
Speed versus size and precision versus power. However you look at it, the level of anticipation is high for Israel Adesanya's UFC title defence against the man they call the Eraser. While many, including UFC boss Dana White, believe the fight will be an epic, the Kiwi star expects one-way traffic.
People say it's a fight of the year, like Dana White said, but that's only if he's tough enough to actually take a beating from me for 5 rounds. But I just don't think his gas tank's going to hold up. But I'm not downplaying the stakes. I feel like for my legacy, it's just the look of it. Like I've said, people are still fooled by muscle.
Also in the spotlight is the undefeated pro records of both athletes. But for Adesanya, keeping that 0 next to his name isn't a motivating factor.
That's like the same thing with the whole title. Like I've said since the jump, that the title is just a fancy tiara. I just get to grab it along the way on my journey to greatness. So same thing with the being undefeated. It's never really been a thing like, oh, I've got to protect it and keep it and it's my precious.
One thing the Nigerian-born Kiwi does undoubtedly care deeply about is his teammates. Kai Carter-France, Brad Riddell and Shane Young will also represent City kickboxing on Sunday. Ranked 7th in the flyweight division, Carter-France says having a 12-strong contingent from the overachieving Auckland gym on Fight Island is a huge plus.
It definitely makes it a lot more comfortable. Just you're so familiar with these faces that you see day in, day out at the gym, and that's going to make all the difference come fight night, being backstage, blasting some Kiwi music, some 660 or some Poirier in the back, and then coming out to the cage.
The fighter of Māori descent says it means everything to represent Aotearoa and his culture on the world stage.
This is embedded in me. This is in my blood. My ancestors, my tupuna would have been doing this, 100 years ago, fighting for land, and I'm just a modern-day version of that. That's what I channel when I fight, and it's the feeling, and it's the wairo, and it's the mana that you take with you, and I feel like that's what we embody at City Kickboxing.
That pride drives an intense dedication, which has been much needed in the lead-up to the event. Among other hurdles, the international TV market means the Kiwi contingent will be fighting between 4 and 7 in the morning. But that hasn't been a worry for Riddell.
It's actually pretty easy. You'd be surprised. Like, your body adjusts pretty quick, and a lot of it is mentality. This is just business week. Nothing else matters except getting the W. So you just do whatever you have to.
It's an attitude which, along with their renowned team-first focus, has been key in the gym's success. And Shane Young, returning to action after a roller coaster 18 months out, says they're not done yet.
I hope one day to have 8 fighters all on the same card in New Zealand or Australia and just, basically run the whole show based around City Kickboxing, because I know we've got the potential. There's so many dudes in our ranks that could just slay it right now.
The immediate focus, though, is on performing on Sunday. Another member of City Kickboxing's UFC stable, Dan Hooker, is confident in his teammates, especially the skill set of their biggest star, Adesanya.
It is massive. It's got doors out back, it's got down the hallway. His arsenal is huge. And when you compare the two, it's difficult for me to see this even being a competitive matchup.
Israel Adesanya couldn't agree more. And he remains amused rather than offended by critics who say otherwise.
They're lucky I like the whole hype thing, because I've lived off that through dance. I love hype, especially when the crowd goes crazy, and I love hype. I've been fighting for how long in this company? So short. And I'm the champion now, and I've defended my belt twice, and apparently I'm still all hype.
That hype train pulls into town yet again on Sunday. For Checkpoint, Clay Wilson.
Successful musicians often find creative ways to spend their money, but how about building your own city? The singer Akon is building his own high-tech city in Senegal, complete with its own currency, the A coin. He hopes the $6 billion project will attract African-American tourists, saying it'll be the place they can be free from the discrimination they face at home. Here's the BBC's Mark Mardell.
I
got my back to the wall, hands to the sky, trying to do right.
A Senegalese-American singer has a dream.
And I don't wanna go back.
Akon's vision, a $6 billion project to build a brand new city in Africa, in Senegal. The video is of an astonishing place. Sinuous, silvery, reflective organic buildings twist into the sky. Schools, film studios, restaurants, a police station and a casino shaped like an oyster, all as the rubric goes, reflecting nothing but happiness. It also deliberately reflects Wakanda, the Afro-futurist city in the film Black Panther. Professor Ola Oduku is head of architecture at the Manchester School of Architecture.
The idea of Afrofuturism was very much around a democratic future for Africans, where we look at Africa and what it has in terms of design, technology, and how that in itself can produce a city that is different, that looks, I guess, African and futurist in its conception and development.
Akon laid the foundation stone recently. Building is planned to begin next year, and he told a news conference it has a political purpose.
Our idea here is to build a futuristic city that incorporates all the latest technologies. Akon City has to become the beginning of Africa's future.
The singer Akon ending Mark Mardell's report there. Very quickly, we have time for some of your feedback tonight. This in regard to some of our COVID coverage, the family who travelled to Taupua. I am sick of the Auckland blaming, says Jill. The latest COVID-19 cluster originated in India, and those who have treated positive were in isolation in Christchurch. They visited Taupua after they went through isolation, when they could reasonably have expected to have been clear. As an Aucklander, I booked a domestic holiday for next week to support the tourism and hospitality industry, but honestly, I feel like staying home. And another one, this is in regard to Judith Collins on the West Coast today for her campaigning. This person says, next time you see Judith, can you please ask her how much West Coast metal goes into an iPhone? By my calculation, the answer is 0.
At 6:30, severe weather watches and warnings encompassing the whole country have been issued for the weekend. Palmerston North residents are being asked to urgently conserve water after the city's main water pipe burst this morning. The National leader has accused the Labour leader of being out of touch with West Coasters who are concerned about the future of the mining industry there. The cost to international sports teams to isolate in New Zealand, including the England netballers, will be around $7,000 per player. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, the RNZ Pacific team has more on Bougainville's new president, the former revolutionary Ismail Toroama. It's been a windy old week for the Country Life team, the four-piece indie pop outfit LA, this week's Friday Night Live act. And as the world around us seems to get more complicated, we've got a sonic tonic